Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Second Act Actors. I'm your host, Dr. Janet McMorty, and I'm still a medical doctor, simultaneously trying to pursue a career in acting. My guest this week is Rod Garcia. Rod was he was many things. He was a horse wrangler. He was a private investigator. He was a literary agent, now turned actor, writer, voiceover actor. Oh my gosh. He does, I think, at least 3 impressions on this episode. Take a listen, see how many you can hear. He definitely does Christopher Walken. He definitely does Schwarzenegger. And he definitely does Yoda. I can't remember if he does any more. He's an incredible, incredible mimic. And that's how he got started, was mimicking others. That's how he got started in the voiceover world. And you'll hear it in this episode. But he met Christopher Walken and was told by Christopher Walken that he had one of the 3 best Christopher Walken impressions in the world. This was in the 90s. Who knows if it still holds up? But if you hear his impression, you'll agree with me. Yeah, it still holds up. Please enjoy the incredible Rod Garcia. Paranormal podcasts are pretty popular these days.
I would think so. And I even considered going on, but I thought I'd rather talk about things that I know about and then go. So, but I did actually tell my author to hey, reach out to these people and see, because I thought that could be useful. And I don't know where it went from there, honestly. I don't think it panned out, but I think they were looking more for people actually involved in like paranormal investigations and had seen things and had stories to tell than someone who wrote about fictional accounts.
Oh, I see. Yeah, they want more of I remember seeing shows like that on TV. I don't even know if they still exist anymore, because everyone now is listening to podcasts, right?
Right.
About the ghost hunters.
There's a whole network, actually, and I'll get advertisements for them, but it's the Gaia network. And apparently Gaia has like everything, like the guy with the crazy hair that says aliens, it's all of that is on this Gaia network. So if you ever, and I think they do like a free trial. So if you're ever just curious, or you're like, thinking, I just need some wackiness in my life, it's like all of the ancient alien stuff on there. And I saw Bigfoot and dated his brother, and whatever. It's all the crazy stories, but Gaia is kind of fun.
I love it. When I started doing this podcast, I remember thinking about, because I always say like, oh, who's your niche? Like, who do you want your listeners? And does that already exist in this world? I'm like, of course it exists in the world, because literally every single niche already exists in this world. If you can dream it up, there are people there who are doing it already and will listen to you talk about it.
Exactly. People ask me all the time, like, what advice do you give to authors? And I tell them, write what you write what you love, write what's in you, because if you try to adapt, people recognize that you're not writing from the heart. I mean, obviously there's, technical writing and stuff, and that's different. But if you're really writing, and if you're writing fiction and you love it, write what you know and write what you love, because there's always an audience. And like the internet has proven that time and again. There's, in good and bad ways, there's an audience for everything.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, tell me your story. You have worn, and I think still very much wear, many hats.
I need to cover the dome sometime. So when I first signed on, it said, hey, you're about to join, Rod. Let's check your hair, camera, and mic. And then hair was conveniently crossed out. And I thought, besides watching, I can but about like you said about many hats. Yeah, it's funny. When I was in high school, and this, going all the way back, I could go back earlier. I loved writing. I loved performing. I loved writing little skits and, doing it kind of the same story you hear with a lot of folks that are kind of into that part of the industry. It's a part of your blood from the very from the beginnings. It starts, your roots are there. So I was always writing little stories and putting on skits and whatnot. I got into high school and I got into drama and creative writing. And in fact, I owe a lot of what I'm doing right now to a creative writing teacher that I had in high school. His name was Sid Waller. And my high school days predate the internet and home PCs. So, or at least PCs were kind of they were on the verge of, showing up at that point. But we would walk into class every day, and he, on the blackboard, would have written in some script. And the reason I said predating PCs is that he would write in like a different font every day. The 2 words, what if? And seeing those 2 words on the blackboard, but jumping out in different lettering every day, just somehow affected my way of thinking. I'd walk into that classroom and somehow magically be able to say, what if this? What if that? And I know Disney has their Marvel what if. They've had the comics for years, but those are powerful words. And I think they really became a foundation for how I did everything. What if? What if you did this? What if you tried that? What if you went this direction instead of that? And so a lot of my writing was influenced by all of that, but I still at that point believed I wanted to be an actor. And that was like my passion. I wanted to act. I wanted to be the next something, the next big star. And so I moved down to Hollywood as a just basically out of high school. I said, this is where I'm going. I moved down, found that I was being offered roles that I would not want my parents or any future children that I might have to see. So I kind of stepped away from the acting avenue. But at that point, I actually discovered there was a woman named Sherry Robb who ran a talent agency in Beverly Hills called AFH, and they handled they handled literary and talent, and they handled like a lot of the MTV folks, and it was a great little agency, and a good group of people, great place to learn. But she offered me a job reading scripts and just basically going over new manuscripts that would come through and kind of determine what went into the slush pile and what was actually viable. And found that I had a good eye for it, moved me into editing, and eventually ended up becoming a literary agent, which was really cool. And then started doing talent agenting as well. So did that for quite a while. My son was born, I have 2 kids. My son was born in 2001. And shortly after that, it became apparent that the industry wasn't any place I really wanted my kids to grow up. And you've probably heard a lot of horror stories about, young people growing up in the industry. I was lucky. I got to the industry. I was already coming into my adult years, but I know a lot of people that I met early on that are famous now, I guess you'd say, but they were struggling at the time. And I just watched them go through some awful, awful things along the way. And I thought, I don't want my kids to go through that. And my ex-wife and I, we had an opportunity to go to move out to Arizona and change life, start things over. And so we took the chance. Ever since then, I've done so many different things, but recently got back to I say recently, but it was in 2016, we started a little publishing company called Epiphany Mill. And just this year, I passed the CEO duties over to my wife, as she's been involved with it the whole time, and she is the Spock to my Kirk. I'm definitely the one who rushes into things with fists in the air, screaming about the injustice, and she's much more likely to step back and say, perhaps we should consider the outcome here. So yeah, she's taken things over and given me the opportunity to move into the CCO position and really do the things I'm good at, really do the things that I love. I was passionate about getting it started, but it's kind of hard when you are a creative spirit and you're doing the day-to-day business type of thing. So I know I just rambled there a lot, but It's been an interesting road. Heck, my first jobs, I started off as I worked as a cattle wrangler in Wyoming. I did some summer work as a cattle wrangler, and spending 12-hour days, 6 days a week in the saddle will change your perspective on life. I even worked for a private investigator as a field operative for a while, did undercover work. So had a lot of perspective on life, and I think it gives me kind of a unique way of looking at how other people function and being able to understand other people's perspective as well, kind of vantage points, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think, I always like to go back to people's childhoods and wonder, was there pressure from anyone to say, yeah, you're a writer, or you're good at writing, you're creative, but that's not a practical job. Go and do something. Like, you want to go be an actor in LA? Okay, they're there, right? Nice try. It's great to have dreams, but was there ever that?
I think there's always that underlying, that it doesn't really go away, and people try to be supportive. My dad, I remember at the time, I was in fact, one of the things talking about acting, voice acting has been something I've been very passionate about, and as far as like what you're doing now, kind of the second act, voice acting is really my transition back into the acting part of things. But my dad was real supportive of that at the time. I remember he was, there's a voiceover studio down in Los Angeles called Del Mar Media Arts, and they do voiceover training and classes and whatnot. And Gordon Jump, who was the original Maytag man, he was the boss on WKRP in Cincinnati. Great guy. He was one of my mentors. I got to learn from him there, and took a lot of voice acting. And so, I've had family be supportive of it. I don't know that they ever thought that it was going to be my calling, but they tried to be as supportive as they understood how to be, if that makes sense. I didn't have anybody who was blatantly saying you're wasting your life, you're making mistakes, but like I think most parents try to do, I hope most of them try to do, support what your kids want to do in a way that at least is constructive. So it wasn't bad. There was nothing toxic in that regard. It was just, they tried to support it, but really didn't understand how or why. So kind of have to have that passion to really understand it.
Well, and I think I would wonder about, like, how did you learn what to do for all the careers you've had, right? Was there formal training, or are you the type of person who is a knowledge gatherer from wherever you would be placing yourself, right? With all these varied things you've done.
Definitely the latter. Yeah. I before I went to Wyoming, I had been on horseback. Maybe a half a dozen times. And it was like, in more of a social environment. So it wasn't out there doing things. So I learned pretty quickly. And working for the private investigator, I feel like I was 17 when I started working for him, which these days would probably be highly frowned upon, putting a 17-year-old in. There were dangerous situations that I got put in working with this guy, and he was great. He was a great mentor, but he taught me a lot about life and people. And I'll tell you, you work as a private investigator and you see some of the darker sides of life that you really don't necessarily want to see. So it opened up a lot of areas in my mind as far as realizing what. But your question about being, kind of a knowledge gatherer, that was actually a real benefit when I was doing that job, because I was able to pivot and kind of chameleon as I was going through. And he would send me into, like I say, at a very young age, I had never had any actual experience doing it, but he would send me into undercover work and say, here's your role, play it. And I think that was probably, if I ever say I had a real acting role, it was work, and I've never considered this before until right now. So thank you for asking this question. I feel like that was probably my acting role of a lifetime, working for this private investigator and going places and pretending to be things and pretending to be a part of something. and literally having people go, come on in, you are who you say you are. And it was very, yeah, it's interesting. I guess I did act for a while.
Well, and it's interesting you're talking about being a chameleon, right? Like, and so, I've talked to lots of people about jobs, right? About work and the people who have been actors since the beginning and have just been like, I am sticking with it. They've got the grit. They stick through it and through thick and thin do their job until they die. And not just acting, any job, right? But it's really interesting what you're saying about being a chameleon and doing a bunch of different types of jobs. Like, how can that not benefit you as a performer? Because
as a performer, very much.
Life experience, right? It's just, have to just be a sponge.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does, like I say, it really opens up perspectives on other people's lives. I worked as a taxi driver for a while I was writing back in 2010, 2011. I was working on a book, and I took 6 months working as a cab driver just because it was a great way to pay the bills. I could be flexible, work on my own hours. And but I got to talk to so many interesting people, and all they see is a cab driver. They don't see someone who's asking them questions or interviewing them, in a way. All they see is the cab driver. They make immediate assumptions about who you are and where you come from in life. So, but yeah, when you were saying how could it not benefit you, it's funny because from a financial aspect, it doesn't. Seeing all of this, it'd be like being a lifelong traveler. It's tough to set down roots when you're going from place to place to place, and really to have any sort of stability. And I'd say if there's any one downfall to the life I've lived over time and being able to kind of do different things and experience life from all these different perspectives, it's that it's not real great for the pocketbook. So, but for experiences and for my passion is, and that's writing and interpreting life, yeah, it's been wonderful. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I just need to see it turn into something.
Tell me about your time as an agent. You were both literary and talent agent. Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that.
I worked mostly with the children's division when I was doing literary. I saw tons of children's and young adult work come through, and got real. I mean, I think back and I wonder how many fledgling J.K. Rowlings came through, came through that office at that time. And it was, this was in the early 90s. So it was, the internet still wasn't, people weren't marketing on the internet. People were still doing all kinds of traditional marketing, magazines and whatnot. And it was such a different world at the time. And I don't think anybody saw at that point even how powerful a tool everything, the internet was going to be and internet marketing. And honestly, on the downside of it, how convoluted all of it was going to get. None of us really saw how difficult marketing was going to become, because at that point, the only competition was the other agencies. Suddenly, the internet came along and everything opened up to everyone, which is wonderful because, I embrace that daily. But it really was an interesting transition. And I think a lot of the smaller agencies, like AFH, just really kind of vanished because people were either doing it independently or they were transitioning onto a big agency that could compete with everything that was changing and growing. So it was great. I feel like if you are into music, I feel like some of the, if you look at the 80s, hair metal was a big thing. But then there are some of these bands that came along in the early 90s that were hair metal that made 2 albums and vanished because the whole genre went away. And I feel like the time I got with AFH was really kind of like that. I was at the very end of the end edge of that part of the industry. So I feel really grateful for the opportunity to do that. But it was so cool getting to meet the the different writers, the different people who had so much passion for it, and if nothing else, sparking my desire to do better for people in that way. So, and to pursue that. And then as a talent agent, I got to work with some really cool people over at, like I say, over at MTV. Nina Blackwood was someone I got to hang out with quite a bit. If you know any of the MTV VJs, the originals, but Nina Blackwood was great, and there were several, but and then some of the lesser known actors that like Joey Segal. He's Katie Segal's brother, and cool guy. Just he unfortunately kind of kept working in the shadow of his sister, and but a lot of the kind of lesser known, we were a pretty small agency, but it was interesting. And if nothing else, it really got my feet wet and helped me understand how the industry works. And I got to go to a lot of interesting functions, and as a part of that, you get to go and meet a lot of people, made a lot of lifelong friends, and it was really cool.
A lot of people who listen to this podcast are people interested in pursuing acting or another creative career after their first act, as I'm calling it. And a lot of people, I get a lot of questions personally about, like, how did you find your agent? I need an agent, right? In your experience, your time as both a literary and a talent agent, what would you say, like, are there any qualities of both the humans that you'd meet, or like the books that you'd read, or just the talent that would come across your desk in whatever form there was, that would make it jump out?
It's funny. I think I kind of started off originally talking about how, like, people recognize if you're being true, if you're being passionate, if your passions are coming through. And I think if I could say there was any one thing I would look for, and people worry so much. I mean, of course, you want things to be relatively polished. You don't want to, look like you just threw down a manuscript on a napkin and sent it in. You want things to be professional, but at the same time, passion shines through so much more than I think people recognize. If someone is passionate about their work, whether it be as a writer or as an actor or an actress, if you're in there and you're giving it 100%, and I would say that the other half of that, it's neither more or less important, but the other half of passion and talent is willingness to take direction. And a lot of people, the biggest turnoff for any casting director, for any agent, is ego, is arrogance. The moment someone walks in and says, my book is perfect, it doesn't need to be edited. My audition is perfect the way it is, I do not need direction. That's, and especially today, even more so than back then, because back then they were still really trying to appease folks. With the internet now, we've got a way to literally find talent that we didn't have before. You notice there are so many internet stars that have suddenly gone on to do other things. And it's because there's a bigger pool available than there was when it was just people in Hollywood auditioning, and sitting in a room waiting for their chance to audition, or sending books to a very specific set of agencies. Now you've got the ability to self-publish, to put yourself out there with auditions on, audition tapes and reels on the internet. So they're a lot less forgiving about that now than even then. So I would say that the qualities would absolutely be passion and willingness to learn, willingness to take some direction, willingness to accept guidance that comes from a place of wisdom and caring, genuine need to help someone. Hopefully that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, it hit me in the gut, right? Like it's one of those things where when it's said out loud, it makes complete sense. Obviously, you're like, oh well, yeah, duh, don't have an ego. But I think when it comes to creative careers, I kind of wonder, like, how to shut that down, because it's hard to take criticism.
It is.
regardless of if it's obviously really hard to take non-constructive criticism, but it's hard to take constructive criticism when it's your literal soul being put out there, as opposed to I put the bricks over here and built a brick wall, and people can say that brick wall sucks. Like, yeah, that's fine, but it's not me, it's my brick wall.
Yeah.
Where it's like, your acting sucks, your book sucks. You're like, oh, there's no, that is me. You are insulting me.
My soul.
Soul. Like, how, do you have any advice for how to get over that?
You know, and you hear the thick skin comment all the time. Grow a thick skin. Honestly, that's easier said than done. I think, honestly, I think some people are either born with a thick skin or they're not. You don't grow a thick skin. You learn to accept that some people's opinions are going to differ from yours. And I think that would be the other side. I'm glad you asked that, honestly. That's one of those things that I feel like, taking my first statement at complete face value, that could be dangerous if you have the wrong advice. If someone is coming to you and saying your book is terrible, look at J.K. Rowling. I'll use her as an example again, and it's just 50 no's before you get a yes. And I'm pretty sure that along with those 50 no's, there was probably feedback in at least a few of those. Not every agent really does that anymore. Not every, talent director or casting director, not everybody actually bothers with feedback anymore. But I'm pretty sure out of 50 no's, she got some feedback. It could have been very easy for her to say, all right, I'll make the changes that you suggested and maybe we'll work together. She saw something in her work that she felt was important, and she decided that her work was worth sticking behind the way it was, and it paid off. It doesn't mean it always is, and I think sometimes you have to get some honest opinions, but keep in mind that the casting directors, the literary agents, the talent agents, they're not passionate about you. They're not passionate about your work. They're passionate about what you can do for them. And if they see something that they feel is a viable resource, a viable quantity that they can take and say, now I can use this, I can make something of this, they may have different ideas about it. A good example of it would be when The Dark Tower, the movie, came out. The book series was fantastic, but the directors, when they wrote it and they directed it, they had a different vision for it. They wanted to kind of make it a sequel direction, but nobody really understood that. And I feel like sometimes work is done a disservice by allowing someone else to come in and say, I'm going to change it because I think this is how we can sell it. Pretty long-winded answer to, just if you believe in your work, stick with it. If you believe in what you can do, don't take necessarily even 50 people's word for it. Believe in what you can do and believe in what you've got. Now, and I do this. I have people that I know care about me for me. I know are passionate about certain things. And there's a fine line, because you can ask people, hey, what do you think of this? And they're going to tell you that they love it every single time because it's you. But then there are also people that you can trust to say, I really like this, bud. And that becomes your core support group when it comes to things like that, because they still love you. They want to see you succeed. But if they can understand what your perspective is, what your goals are, what your dreams are, and they know you well enough to do that, they can be supportive in ways that people just don't imagine. And I think those are resources people don't use nearly enough. For me, as a writer, I use it as beta readers. These are people that will read things that I've written and give me honest feedback and find things that maybe I could have done differently, or I think you know what I'm saying. That's a very long-winded answer, but
no, I absolutely do. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles that I know people who've come into this industry later on in life struggle to find, is that community of people who they can trust. Because if they didn't come through a traditional theater school background, they don't have that built-in network. And a lot of times the network that they had, like for me, it's like I went to medical school. This network of doctors, when I'm like, now I'm telling them I'm into acting, they're like, huh? Right? Like, I don't get it. Right? So
yes.
They are lovely, well-intentioned people with my best interest at heart for sure, but it's just they don't quite understand So it's trying to find that tribe, that community of like-minded individuals with the intentions of building you up and giving you that constructive criticism. How, when there's so many people out there, thanks internet, who want to tell you what is best for you, how do you filter that?
Well, I think part of it is, and this is what I've done, and this is what other people that I know have done, and it's not. There's no magic answer for anybody. I think, unfortunately, otherwise, somebody would have written a self-help book that would have put all of the other ones away, and they would have all gone to bed, and we'd have one that we go to. But it really comes down to an inner dialogue. What is it that I'm passionate about? What is it that's important to me? What are the non-negotiables? What are the things that I can let go of? What are the things that I can accept change on? What are the things that I am absolutely firm in my foundation on? And it could be specific beliefs. It could be, moral tenets. It could be, and then you start to build on that and decide what kind of criticism am I willing to take? What kind of, and that's not an easy conversation, but it has to start within, because you're the only one that can answer that. What am I willing to accept from other people? Because honestly, that's the first piece. That's the first thing that shuts most people down, is hearing feedback from people who don't get them. And they're like, but you don't understand. You don't get this. You don't know what I'm saying. And that's frustrating. And then you start to wonder, am I just crazy? Am I just, maybe this is not what I should be doing. And, but finding a support group, I feel like things like what we're doing right now, having this conversation and finding people, I think this is how it's done, is developing networks, developing people, and finding the like-minded people and saying, hey, I saw this person on this podcast. I want to reach out to them and say, because I think, and then building those communities. They really just, as much as social media is so pervasive in our daily life, I think it has also kind of taken away the ability to have tighter knit relationships and more focused conversations, because the conversations on social media just get so convoluted so quickly. It's very difficult to have to really know what you intend to say and get real conversations going, get real answers, because everybody's in all directions. And I know there are some wonderful platforms. You could go onto Reddit, you could go onto Quora or something and ask questions and talk. But I'm old enough to remember when everything was done, at a table. People said, hey, let's get together and sit down. Let's go to, even if it was just to say, let's go to Denny's late when there's nobody there and sit around a table and just brainstorm. You don't really see it done much anymore, but I used to sit at like table readings with, when they would read through a script for a film, and that was fantastic, watching everybody get into character and connect. And the reason I bring that up is because now you're getting people together with a similar goal, and they're sharing thoughts, and something may be changed in a script search simply because of how a certain person says something, and they go, holy cow, I never thought of putting it quite that way. You said it wrong. You said it the way I didn't intend it, but now I'm rethinking how it needs to go. And I feel like those conversations just don't happen organically anymore. It's just people typing in words. Words are too easy to filter when you're like doing this right now. And I know it gets, there's an edit process and everything, but still, words are unfiltered when you're speaking. You ask a question, we talk, we're having a conversation. But I think it's way too easy to filter not just your answers, but your questions, and to rethink and second guess. What am I asking? What do I really want? Oh, nobody's going to understand it. Look, I just saw that person asked a similar question. Nobody wants to hear it from me now. But it's still your question. It's still your purpose, your passion, your direction. And how do we find those groups? I think we have to take it upon ourselves to actually build those groups. I don't know that they exist in everybody's ideal form anymore.
Tell me about your voiceover work.
Love doing voiceover. I started doing silly voices when I was about 12. Found that it's when, your voice starts to change, and I started to find that I actually could mimic. So it was a guilty pleasure back then, and now it's just a guilt. But I used to do prank calls when I was a kid. I mean, there was no star 69. There was no caller ID. It was just my brother and I thought it was the funniest thing to call and confuse people. We didn't say awful things to people, but we would confuse people with voices that would make them scratch their heads. And I found that I could mimic a few of my friends' parents, and I would call them and call their families and pretend to be them, and then watch the mayhem ensue later when they say, I never said that. I didn't call you. What are you talking about? It's pretty awful. And yes, I'm sure that there is some, if you believe in karma, I'm sure that some of the jobs I've had to take over the years have been a result of that, I feel like sometimes anytime you have to take a job doing, like customer service on a phone, it's because you did prank calls or something awful somewhere in your life. So. But literally, I got the bug from mimicking other people, and then finding that I had a knack for it. And in fact, Chris Walken, and I don't know if this would hold true now. This was in I think 93, 94 maybe. He told me that I did my impression of him that he heard. He said that it was in his top 3, but he wouldn't tell me who the other 2 were and where I fell in the top 3. And so I still enjoy that. I thought that was pretty cool back then. I'm going to pop my headset so I can do it and hear myself a little bit. But, it's crazy when you go to the bookstore and you find a magazine with your face on it. It's confusing and maddening. I don't know, but wow. So I don't know where I'd fall in his range now.
Number 1. That's so good.
The other one that my kids love is...
So, it's very important that I have to tell you, when you're going to go into the gym, you have to remember that if you're going to be lifting weights, you have to make the noises to go with the weights. You have to remember that when you're making the lifting sound, you have to lift it. And when you're doing the poses, you have to do the high noises for the high poses or for the low poses. It's super fantastic. You have to remember this. And then you go to Austria and you have some turkey. They didn't at the Thanksgiving in Austria, but you go to America and you do this. So anyway, but
that's so good. I'm trying not to laugh out loud.
My son, he was so convinced when he was little that I was stealing Arnold's voice. He was worried for Arnold. He said that, does he have your voice when you're using his? So I always thought he was worried that poor Arnold was confused that he had my voice suddenly. So he was pretty sure I was swapping voices. But
oh my God,
I learned really early on that I could do a lot of different voices. And it's still sad to think about, but Robin Williams was someone I got to know real well when I was working out there, and kind of took me under his wing early on and told me that he'd seen a lot of young people go through bad stuff, and kind of got that stuck in my head that I didn't want to go that route. And but he used to listen to a lot of my voices and critique along the way, and of course I got to hear a lot of his stuff too. It was pretty cool. But what a wonderful man, by the way. That was he was like, even at a young age, when I met him, he was younger than I am now, and even at that age, he was just like everybody's grandpa. It was funny. He wasn't old, but he just had that feel like you just knew that you could trust him, you know? He was a good person. So, but anyway, voice acting. I actually had an opportunity, and it was almost my big break. There was a show in the 90s called The Critic, and John Lovitz. It was an animated series with John Lovitz, and it was about a movie critic, and his son. And John Lovitz was the main character, and I got hired to do like Hank Azaria does kind of all the utility voices for The Simpsons. They wanted someone to come on and do voices because he was a movie critic. They would put movies and weird commercials and stuff, very much like kind of like the Family Guy does now, with all of their little interspersed sketches that get thrown into it. And I remember when I recorded tons of voices. I recorded voices for horses, for a toilet, for an old cowboy. For a string of little ducklings talking to each other as they were walking along and losing mom. And I did all these voices that I recorded, and then the show got canceled. So I understand that some of the voices ended up in a couple of the syndicated episodes at the end of their run, but a ton of it just kind of hit the cutting room floor as they abandoned the show. And it was too bad. I always kind of looked at it as my, as the potential big break, but it is what it is. I mean, and there's so many people in Hollywood that have that same story, my almost story.
What would you say your family, your loved ones, friends, how would they describe what you do for a living these days?
It's interesting. Actually, these days, I think they're finally seeing it as viable. And it took a long time because you go, and I think you probably hear this story a lot too from people, especially when you're trying to. For me, I'm transitioning back into it. I'm kind of working my way backwards back into it, into the industry again. But a lot of people are just getting into it for the first time, finding that they've had a passion for it, and now they want to do something with it. And it is difficult when your family's looking at you, going, "What are you doing with your life?" I'm sure you could share stories about when you said, "Hey, medical school, I'm going to act." And I'm sure people just, like you said, even the doctors scratch their heads at it. But I think my family is finally seeing at this point now, first of all, I'm not stopping. I'm not going away. I don't give up. I've been working at it for a very long time. Perseverance, that really is another characteristic. It's not something that the professionals are looking for, but man, you got to have it. You got to have that. If there's a thick skin, it's got to be perseverance. It's just got to be that old Rocky Balboa thing about, it's not how hard you can get hit, it's how hard you can get hit and still get back up. That's such good advice for like everything in life. It's like it belongs, like I could just see some like Yoda saying that to someone, it's how hard it is matters not. But they do take it seriously now. They see me as not just a publisher, but as an author, as I'm producing audiobooks now for my books and for others. So they're seeing that as viable, and I think they're just finally realizing even if I have to hang on by the skin of my teeth, I'm holding on, and I'm continuing forward no matter what. So you're asking this at a point that it's actually starting that opinion, that landscape of opinions is starting to change. Not just family, but friends and acquaintances, way back to high school, college, grade school even, people that are reaching out going, "Man, it's good to see you actually doing this," like actually doing the things that you love. And it's been so cool watching the path that you've taken to get here. And hearing people say that has been really, it's touching. It's really neat to hear that from people.
Absolutely. It's affirming, I think, right?
It is.
Absolutely.
Self-affirmation is tough, but when you can have other people share it, share in that, it does make a difference.
It does. And I think, again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, how hard it can be to put your soul out there and be like, this is me and my talent.
Yes.
And when somebody comes back to you and says, "Good job," it's just, I know there's a whole like love languages book about words of affirmation. And I think
very
most
much
actors and artists are like the words of affirmation love language, because like, thank you. I'm not crazy.
No.
Thank you. I can do this.
Yes. God, that's so true. It's so true. And I think I'd never really thought about that, but you're right. I think even certain careers probably have a love language. depending on what you're doing. But I think anything in the arts really is very much, you need the affirmation. And there are some people who don't care. They're just doing it for themselves. And if it sells, then it's great. I know there are a lot of people who are just, they really don't care what other people think, as long as what they're doing is well received, and why, they don't care, as long as they know it got there. But I think most people, you're right. That's huge, the affirmation. And I don't know if I ever completely answered that about, putting your soul out there, but I just feel like that's such a hard thing for most people to do. It really is. And that's why I say start with a few people that are close, but not so close that they're going to tell you everything you want to hear. I mean, everybody's mom wants to go, oh my gosh, you're amazing. This is the most incredible whatever. You could do Hamlet and stumble through it, and stutter and whatever. And they're going to say, oh my God, I was moved beyond words. But I feel like, there is a point when you have to step off that. It's like being a skydiver. There is a point when you have to jump out of the plane to experience the fall. Otherwise, you're not skydiving. There is a point when you have to move forward. Somebody asked me an odd question. Like, you had mentioned that putting it out there is like having people criticize, something that you're passionate about. And I was thinking about it. It's like having someone tell you that your kids are awful. And although I would defend my kids over my books any day, books are just a matter of opinion. My kids, I feel, there's something different. But you know what I'm saying there. And I thought I think the question had been about, trying to describe your book in one word. I thought, hey, that's like taking a rainbow and saying, describe it in one color. I don't, only you know the depth of what you've got going on. And I think that know your work, know yourself, and be confident in what you're doing. That's actually something else that people look for. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Arrogance is, I don't need you. I don't need your advice. I whatever you say means nothing to me. Confidence is just simply saying, I'm good at this, but I can be better. And have confidence when you're talking about your stuff. I think too many good interviews or too many good opportunities for people to act or to write or to get out there with a good agent or with the public is flatlined by lack of confidence. Believe in yourself, believe in your work, believe in your interview, believe in your audition, believe in what it is you're putting out there, because the people seeing it will recognize when you don't. And if you can't have confidence in your own talent, in your own creativity, in your own skills, it's hard for someone in the industry to look at you and go, you're an option. You're viable. So, and sometimes without having any of those affirmations, it's so difficult to have that confidence. It's like it's this vicious cycle. It's a catch-22. I've had nobody affirm that I'm any good, and but I still have to remain confident. Yeah. If you want to do it and you believe in it, then yes.
Absolutely. And I think in this era of self-tape auditions as actors, right, when we're not in the room with anyone, when even if you weren't getting verbal feedback from an audition in the room, you were getting emotional, energetic, tactile, visual feedback.
So much so.
But now you are sending the tape into the ether and getting ghosted.
Yes.
And being told that's enough feedback. That's good feedback. No feedback is good feedback. No, right?
No.
But yeah, so when you're not getting any affirmations back that your talent is of any good and literally hearing crickets, I think, and this is what I've done, is it right? I don't know. I have found people who will watch my tapes and give me feedback.
Yes.
They are nothing to do with the casting process. If you were to look at it as an external observer, you'd say their feedback means jack diddly in the end scheme of things.
Yeah.
For you, maybe, but for me, I need that because otherwise it's like I'm getting nothing.
Yep. Yeah. I think, and again, the networking is huge. The networking opportunity, getting it out there is incredible because you will get different opinions. You will get people. The one caution I have is to be careful of competition, because there are people who will be jealous of what you can do and who you are and what you're bringing to the table and go, it's if I have time, there's a funny story that I like to share.
Yes, please.
This was actually, it's the Arnold voice, but have you ever seen the movie Pumping Iron?
Not the full movie, but I know it.
It's a documentary, and it's Arnold very young. But there's a story. Somebody asks him at one point, they say, so, you've been Mr. Olympia so many times, you've been Mr. Universe, you've been Mr. World, you've been all these things. Have you ever had someone come to you and ask for advice that you knew that if you gave them good advice, they would become a threat to your title? And if so, what did you do? And he goes,
that's easy. I remember there was a guy in Germany, and he came to me and he said, Arnold, you're my hero. You're the man I want to be like. I want to be a fantastic bodybuilder like you. Can you give me some good advices so I could go up on the stage and pose properly? And this is where my little, high noises and low noises comes from, because he says to him, so I told him, when you go into the stage, you have to do two things. You have to remember, when you do the high poses, you make the high noises. And when you do the low poses, you growl and you make the low noises. And it only took him 2 poses to get pulled from the stage.
And I thought, what the heck? If Arnold could sabotage someone's career simply because he felt threatened, what would people like you or me do if it was our only shot at success?
Oh, my God.
And so I just feel like, be careful of people who are, it's like there's just this balance. Understand what people are willing to tell you that's good, but also some of you have, as much as you have to take mom's, oh, I love it, with a grain of salt, some people you have to take their criticism with a grain of salt as well, because they may just be going, low pose. And that's really tough.
Yeah. And I think I come from a career path and an educational path that is extremely competitive. Like getting into medical school, I've always been extremely competitive, intellectually, physically, played sports and stuff like that. And my family is very competitive, and it was always seen as a pro, right? This is a positive aspect because look at where it will get you. It'll get you into medical school. It'll get you into the position that you are. And then when now in this creative industry, in the entertainment industry, especially in a tiny market and a fledgling emerging market like Canada, I find the biggest detriment to my career now is my competitive nature, because like maybe if I was in LA, it would be a benefit because it's just this established market where you kind of need to compete with the millions of other 30-something white females who are trying to get into the industry.
Right.
Where I think in Canada, and maybe I'm just, saying it out loud so I believe it, that if I'm competitive in this market, if I'm being cutthroat and mean to my air quotes competition, that is ego, like what we were saying before, coming in, and it is a huge negative towards me networking in this industry and building myself up as a reliable, nice human being to work with, which I am. But
I can get
my
that from you
competitive
right
nature is not helpful here, which has been a learning process.
It can be in the sense that you still want to remember that what the brass ring is, and that is work. I mean, if you want to work and if you want to be recognized, you're still competing. You're still, it's like going into a job interview and feeling bad for the person who didn't get the job. If you're the best qualified for it, then you have to believe in yourself enough to say, I am the best for this. It's like when you're writing a cover letter for anything and you want to say, why am I the best for this? I feel like that's where I say and you just said it. There's a difference between ego and bringing in arrogance. And I think if anybody listening or you or anybody can make a distinction between arrogance and ego, arrogance and confidence, honestly, then you're okay. I know a lot of very confident people in the industry that are still good people and care about people. Robert Downey Jr., great example of that. Good guy. Shirt off his back for people. Honestly, I mean, as a person, good person. Very competitive in the industry. He's not afraid to walk into a room and say, so you just interviewed him, you just auditioned him. Let me tell you why he's not the guy for the role and why I am. Not that he's disparaging the other person as a person. He might say, Chris Pratt's a great guy, but let me tell you why I fit this role better. And I think that's okay. Again, it's as long as you're not doing it in an arrogant, looking down on everybody else type of way. It really is. I think a healthy dose of confidence is almost a survival tool in the industry. Having a little bit of an ego is fine as long as it's not arrogance. And there are plenty, and we've seen it hundreds of times play out this way. There are so many entertainers that have just vanished because they were difficult to work with. Their demands became crazy. They were not nice to people. And so there is a balance. I think that's true with everything. It's like I did an interview with a guy who talks about video games. He was interested that my books revolve around a character who's involved in a video game type of world or scenario, at least the current ones. And he said, "What do you think about video gaming?" And I said, "Video game is great. If it's one of those things that someone uses as an escape, or to take out a little aggression at the end of the day, it's when someone's life becomes consumed with anything, and it can be consumed in our own self-confidence or our own self-worth. When you become too consumed with any one thing, it throws balance out." Boy, I just sounded like I belong on a mountaintop in, Machu Picchu or something.
I'm going to give you another chance to sound like you're in a motivational poster. Do you have any final words of wisdom or advice?
Oh, wow. I think that's the toughest thing. No, it's I always tell people if you believe in something, stick with it. Stick with your passions. Don't give up. It's so easy to, I'll just go right back to the 50 no's and the 51, the 51st yes. There is a market for everything. There's a market for every style. But I think the other thing, if over the years, the things that I've seen, aside from perseverance, just not giving up and knowing what something is worth, be humble. Don't be afraid to know. Don't be afraid to take advice, and know that there's always improvement. There's always improvement in whatever craft you have mastered. I'll do the air quotes like you. Whatever you've already mastered, there's always room for improvement. And Anthony Hopkins, one of the greatest actors of any generation, and he says, the day I stop watching other people act, the day I stop learning from their style, the day I stop, wanting to be more, wanting to show more, is the day I might as well just, go and sit on a couch and watch Matlock. Yeah. For the rest of my life. I keep learning, keep growing.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, Mr. Garcia, for being my guest this week. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your amazing story with us and your incredible words of wisdom. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I hope you'll join me next week for another episode of Second Act Actors. Bye.